camera is the master of darkness? Is it the GoPro Hero 10? GoPro Hero 10, GoPro Hero 10. Or the Insta360 1R 1-inch mod? That's quite a mouthful,
I compared the GoPro Hero 10 and Insta360 1R 1-inch mod side by side in low light. Spoiler alert, I was so shocked at the results that I had to do two tests. In part 1, I compared them with the Hero 10 in wide mode and high stabilization. In part 2, I set the Hero 10 to linear mode and boost stabilization. In part 3, I took shots on a tripod at fixed ISOs and fixed shutter speeds from ISO 100 to ISO 6400. This video was not sponsored by GoPro or Insta360 or any other company. I did not get paid to make this video. No one reviewed this video or gave input before I posted it. I bought the GoPro Hero 10 myself at the local store with my own money. The 1R 1-inch mod was provided for free by Insta360 more than a year ago for my review. I have affiliate links for GoPro on Amazon and B&H Photo. I have affiliate links for Insta360 on Amazon, B&H Photo, and Insta360's website. Now on to the tests. Wow, the first thing that sticks out to me is how much better the stabilization is on the Insta360. The second thing I noticed is how much darker the Insta360 is. Let's talk about those differences. First, the stabilization. To compare stabilization fairly, we need to have roughly similar field of view. That's because both of these cameras use electronic stabilization. They have internal gyros that record the camera's movement. Then the camera uses that information to counteract the movement. So for example, if the camera rotates left, the electronic stabilization will rotate it to the right. To make stabilization work, the video has to be cropped. This gives the camera room to stabilize the video. The heavier the crop, the more stabilized the video will be. When you're looking at stabilization comparisons, you gotta keep this in mind. To make my comparison fair, I matched the field of view of these cameras as closely as I could. We see that when both cameras have a similar field of view, the 1R 1-inch mod is much more stable. It's not even close. This surprised me because so many YouTubers are gushing over how good the stabilization is on the Hero 10. It may be very good, but apparently not as good as the 1R 1-inch mod. Now for this part, I did use high stabilization, not boost. Will boost make the GoPro better than the Insta360? Well, I did that test in the second half of this video. But before we get there, let's talk about the other big difference, the exposure, which is like the brightness of the image. We'll also talk about the noise. Now, the Insta360 1R has a 1-inch sensor, which is more than 4 times larger than the 1/2.3-inch sensor of the GoPro. With the larger sensor, you have more ability to gather light. In this case, a 2-stop advantage. So, I was a bit surprised that the GoPro looks brighter. Now, of course, our analysis doesn't stop there. The right level of exposure has some subjectivity to it. It seems that in this case, GoPro felt that the right exposure ought to be brighter, while Insta360 chose a more conservative exposure. The good thing is that we can make the exposure closer to each other in post-processing. So I graded the Insta360 footage to match the exposure, highlights, shadows, and color of the GoPro Hero 10 so that we're comparing more fairly. Now, you might think that I'm doing this to give Insta360 an advantage, but it's actually the other way around because boosting the exposure in post-processing is not free. It has a penalty. It will increase noise. For most cameras, the post-processing noise is higher than the noise that you'd get if you had shot with the right exposure to begin with. So in this case, I'm actually giving Insta360 a slight handicap. When we compare the footage at a similar exposure, we see that the grain on the Insta360 1R is a little more noticeable. We'd say it has more luminance noise, but it also has a lot more detail. Sometimes when the camera has low luminance noise, it's because the camera is applying noise reduction. But the trade-off for doing that is that you'll reduce the detail. Experienced shooters prefer cameras with low noise reduction because you can apply noise reduction in post. But if the noise reduction is too high, you cannot recover the lost detail. Now, besides luminance noise, we should also look at the chroma noise or color noise, which shows up as blotches in the video, especially the darker areas. For chroma noise, we can see that the Insta360 1R 1-inch has noticeably lower chroma noise. The Hero 10 has a lot of color blotches and the dark shadows look blue. Now, this is not surprising because of the larger sensor of the 1R 1-inch mod. Now, although the Hero 10 has more color noise, its colors seem more natural to me. So for example, the blue splash on my shirt has a much more accurate color on the Hero 10 in my opinion. Now, as I mentioned, I also tested the Hero 10 with boost on. How does its stabilization compare to the 1R 1-inch then? For this test, the Hero 10 field of view or lens mode was set to linear. Stabilization was set to boost. With boost on, the Hero 10 stabilization is better than before, but it still moves around a bit much in my opinion. So how does the 1R 1-inch mod compare? To match the GoPro Hero 10 field of view, I switched the 1R 1-inch mod to narrow. By the way, in case you didn't know, one of the differences between the GoPro and the Insta360 is that when you shoot the Pro mode on the Insta360, you can choose the field of view after shooting. So what's the result? Well, as before, the Insta360 stabilization is way better. It's not even close. It just blasts the GoPro Hero 10 away. Now, honestly, I was just as surprised as you are. That's actually why I did this second test. Because after I got home from the first test, I was surprised at how much better the 1R stabilization was. The Hero 10 stabilization looked so bad in comparison that I thought I accidentally turned off the stabilization. So that's why I went out again to make another test, making sure that the stabilization was on. But we can see that it wasn't a mistake at all. The 1R 1-inch mod does seem to have far better stabilization. Now, do you agree or disagree? Am I crazy for thinking that the 1R has way better stabilization? Let me know in the comments. Now, one more test. Is the Hero 10 better in low light on a tripod? Well, I compared them at fixed ISOs and a fixed shutter speed of 1 over 30th of a second. Here are the results. Now, at low ISOs, you can see that both cameras are too dark. So, I pushed the exposure to the equivalent of ISO 3200. As I mentioned before, you'll see that shooting at ISO 3200 is way better than shooting at ISO 100 and then pushing it 5 stops in post. That's the post-processing penalty that I talked about. Well, anyway, when I push the exposure, we see that the 1R is able to recover a lot more detail. That's called exposure latitude, and that's really important. And FYI, cameras with better exposure latitude also tend to have much better dynamic range. As for noise, we can see that the 1R is grainier, but it does have a lot more detail. This seems to show again that the Hero 10 has more aggressive noise reduction. On the other hand, the difference in detail is much closer than I expected. As for color noise, the 1R has lower chroma noise just as with our previous samples, but the GoPro colors are more pleasant to me. So, what do you think of these tests? Were they helpful? Were you surprised as I was? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to buy either of these cameras, you can use the links in the description. Now, FYI, if you do not buy the GoPro from gopro.com, you won't be able to get the GoPro subscription with it. And that's going to let you miss out on the $100 discount. Now, meanwhile, I'm going to do another comparison between the Hero 10 and the 1R 1-inch mod in daytime. Don't miss it, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in 360.